A mountain man came to buy cattle, but the rancher offered him his 3 fattest daughters instead. In the dusty street, laughter roared as the crowd mocked the girls, humiliated, ashamed, and trapped by their own father's bargain. But the mountain man didn't laugh. He looked them in the eye and saw dignity where others saw disgrace. Just when hope flickered, the rancher fell to the dirt, clutching his chest, leaving the daughters' futures hanging by a thread. That's when a darker truth surfaced. The family's water rights had been stolen by railroad men with forged papers. Now, the mountain man must decide: ride back to the safety of the high country, or stand and fight for a family the world has cast aside. In a land ruled by greed and ridicule, can honor, faith, and love turn shame into triumph? Or will the weight of humiliation crush them all before justice can be won? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Clear Creek Valley as William Harlan guided his horse down the winding trail. His pack horse followed dutifully behind, hooves crunching on loose shale. The mountain man's weathered face showed little expression, though his eyes remained sharp as he surveyed the scene below. From his vantage point on the ridge, William could see the cattle pens buzzing with Saturday's trading activity. Dust rose in thin clouds around the corrals where ranchers gathered to buy and sell stock before winter set in. The familiar sounds of lowing cattle and men's voices carried up on the crisp breeze. William adjusted his worn leather hat, considering his simple mission. 6 head of cattle. That's all he needed to winter with in his high country cabin. He'd saved carefully through summer's trapping to afford them. His cabin was stocked with dried meat and stores, but fresh beef would make the difference in the lean months ahead. The trading grounds grew louder as William approached. Men in dusty clothes clustered around the pens, examining stock and haggling over prices. A few nodded in recognition as he rode past. William had earned their respect over the years through fair dealing, though he kept mostly to himself. He dismounted near the main corral, looping his reins around the hitching post. That's when he first heard Jedediah McGraw's booming voice rising above the general din. "Harlan! You there, William Harlan?" William turned to see Jedediah McGraw striding toward him, face flushed red above his gray beard. The rancher's clothes hung loose on his frame, speaking of hard times, but his voice carried the same commanding tone it always had. Behind McGraw stood 3 young women, his daughters. William knew of them, but had never spoken with them directly. They hung back slightly, discomfort clear in their postures. "Got a proposition for you, Harlan," McGraw announced loudly enough for nearby traders to hear. Several men turned to watch, conversations dying down. William said nothing, waiting. His stillness seemed to agitate McGraw further. "You come down from that mountain of yours looking for cattle, I expect," McGraw continued. "Well, I've got something better to offer." He gestured expansively at his daughters. 3 fine girls raised proper. Take your pick or take all the 3 if you've a mind to. Janice here keeps a tidy house and cooks like an angel. Rose has the voice of one too, sweet as summer rain. And Clara... He broke off with a harsh laugh. "Well, Clara's got spirit enough for 2 wives." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathering crowd. William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he observed the sisters' reactions. Janice, the eldest, kept her eyes downcast, hands clasped tightly before her. Her plain dress was neat but worn, speaking of careful mending. Rose, the youngest, seemed to shrink into herself, though her gentle features showed more sadness than fear. It was Clara who drew William's attention most. She stood straight-backed, chin lifted in defiance, though spots of color burned high on her cheeks. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and unshed tears. "Come now," McGraw pushed, his voice growing louder still. "Take them fat or leave empty. That's my offer to you, mountain man." More laughter erupted from the onlookers. Some men elbowed each other, whispering comments behind raised hands. The sisters' discomfort was plain to see now. Rose blinking rapidly, Janice's shoulders hunching slightly, Clara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. William remained silent for a long moment, his expression unchanged. The crowd grew quiet, waiting for his response to this public humiliation. Many expected him to either walk away or join in the mockery. Instead, William removed his hat and stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Miss Janice," he said, inclining his head to the eldest. "Miss Rose." Another careful nod. "Miss Clara." His voice carried clearly in the sudden stillness, showing each sister the same simple respect. The unexpected courtesy seemed to catch everyone off guard. The sisters' faces showed surprise, Janice raising her eyes briefly, Rose offering a tremulous smile, Clara's defensive posture easing slightly. "Mr. McGraw," William continued, replacing his hat, "I came to trade for cattle, nothing more." His tone held no judgment, but the words fell like stones in a pond, rippling through the watching crowd. Several men shifted uncomfortably, no longer finding humor in the scene. McGraw's face darkened further, but before he could respond, William turned back to the sisters. "Ladies," he said quietly, "I wish you good day." The simple words carried weight, acknowledging their dignity when others would strip it away. He turned then to his horses, untying them with unhurried movements. The crowd began to disperse, men turning back to their business with subdued expressions. Some cast uncertain glances between William and the McGraws, as if seeing both in a new light. William led his horses away from the pens, the sound of their hooves clear in the awkward silence he left behind. He had come seeking cattle, but found something else entirely, a moment that would echo through Clear Creek Valley long after the dust had settled. From the corner of his eye, he caught a final glimpse of the sisters. Janice had placed a steadying hand on Rose's shoulder. Clara stood apart still, but her expression had changed. The anger remained, but something else showed in her face as she watched him go, a flicker of wondering respect. The mountain man made his way slowly back up the trail, leaving the cattle pens and their busy trading behind. He had failed to acquire the 6 head he needed, but somehow that seemed less important now. The encounter with the McGraws had stirred something in him, a disquiet he couldn't quite name. The sun was westering as William gained the ridge again. He paused there, looking back down at Clear Creek Valley. The trading grounds were still busy with movement, but the scene felt different now. In those few moments of choosing dignity over cruelty, something had shifted, not just for the McGraw sisters, but for William himself. His pack horse nickered softly, and William patted its neck absently. The animal's solid presence grounded him, as it had through many solitary years in the high country. But for the first time in a long while, that solitude breathed heavier than before. The light was growing golden as William turned his horses toward home. He had much to think about as he climbed back into his familiar mountains. Behind him, Clear Creek Valley grew smaller, but the memory of 3 sisters' faces and the moment he had chosen to defend their dignity went with him. The silence following William's courteous greeting stretched like pulled taffy across the trading grounds. Several men shuffled their boots in the dust, gazes dropping from the unexpected display of respect. The sisters stood frozen, clearly unsure how to respond to such dignified treatment. Janice was the first to move, reaching into a covered basket at her feet. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Mr. Harlan," she said softly, Would you care for some cornbread? Made fresh this morning?" William's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. "Much obliged, Miss Janice." He accepted the offering with careful hands, noting how the cloth was patched but spotlessly clean. The cornbread's fresh, wholesome scent rose up, speaking of skill and care in its making. Rose stepped forward then, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, if you're partial to hymns," she hesitated, gathering courage. "There's a new one we learned at meeting. The Sweet By and By. Do you know it?" "I do," William replied, his deep voice gentle. "A fine choice for summer evenings." Rose's face lit up with surprised pleasure, while Clara watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. When William met her suspicious glare, he simply nodded, acknowledging her right to her anger without challenging it. Something flickered in Clara's expression, confusion perhaps at finding neither mockery nor demand in his manner. The trading ground had grown uncommonly quiet. The usual bustle of cattle sales fell away as men watched this strange scene unfold. Those who had laughed earlier now looked uncomfortable, as if seeing their own behavior reflected in an unflattering light. Jedediah McGraw stood to the side, his earlier bluster deflating in the face of William's steady courtesy. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but suddenly his face went gray. His hand clutched at his chest, fingers tangling in his shirt front. "Pa?" Clara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Pa!" Jedediah swayed on his feet. His eyes rolled back as his knees buckled, sending him crashing into the straw-scattered ground. "Help!" Rose's scream pierced the air. "Someone help him!" The sisters rushed forward as one, dropping to their father's side. Clara cradled his head while Janice frantically patted his cheeks. "Pa, can you hear me? Pa!" William was there in an instant, his strong hands helping to lift Jedediah's shoulders. "Get him to the shade," he directed, his calm voice cutting through the panic. "Away from this sun." Together, they half-carried, half-dragged Jedediah to the shelter of a nearby lean-to. The crowd surged forward, faces concerned now instead of mocking. "Fetch Doc Morrison!" someone shouted. "He's over to Jensen's place!" A young boy took off running toward the far end of the trading grounds. William kept one steadying hand on Jedediah's shoulder while checking his breathing. The old rancher's chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. "Here, let me through." Doc Morrison pushed through the gathered onlookers, medical bag in hand. His lined face was serious as he knelt beside Jedediah, pressing fingers to the rancher's wrist. The sisters huddled together, watching anxiously as the doctor worked. Rose quietly wept while Janice held her close. Clara stood slightly apart, her earlier defiance replaced by naked fear. "His heart's failing him," Doc Morrison announced after a long examination. "Been working too hard, I'd warrant. Man, his age needs to take things easier." "Will he?" Clara's voice caught. "Will he be all right?" The doctor's hesitation spoke volumes. "We need to get him home, let him rest proper. No telling yet how this will go." "I'll fetch water," William offered, already moving toward the well. He returned with a dipper full of cool liquid, helping Doc Morrison trickle small amounts between Jedediah's pale lips. The afternoon light was growing golden, casting long shadows across the trading grounds. The cattle pens, so busy with commerce earlier, stood largely forgotten now. A few men worked quietly to settle the stock for the night, their usual jokes and calls subdued. "We need a wagon," Janice said, practical even in crisis. "The buggy we came in is too small." "Take mine," offered Tom Jensen, stepping forward. "Already hitched up and ready." William helped load Jedediah carefully onto the wagon bed, which had been padded with fresh straw and blankets. The old man stirred slightly but didn't fully wake, his breathing still labored. "I'll drive," William said quietly. When no one objected, he added, "Miss Janice, if you'll give me directions to your ranch?" The sisters climbed up beside their father, arranging themselves to cushion him from the road's jolts. Clara's earlier suspicious glare had transformed into something more uncertain as she watched William handle the reins with gentle competence. They set out just as evening began settling over the valley like a heavy blanket. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they followed the rutted road away from town. Behind them, the trading grounds grew quiet, the day's drama giving way to the soft sounds of cattle settling for the night. William kept the pace careful, mindful of every bump that might jar his ailing passenger. The sisters tended to their father, wiping his brow with dampened cloths and murmuring quiet reassurance when he stirred. The fading light painted the landscape in soft purples and deep blues. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called its evening song. William studied the road ahead, knowing he couldn't in good conscience ride away tonight. Whatever complications might come from staying, honor demanded he see the family safely settled. Janice directed him down a side trail marked by an old oak tree, its branches spreading wide over the path. The McGraw ranch came into view around a bend, a sturdy house showing signs of needed repair, a barn listing slightly to one side, cattle pens that wanted mending. The place spoke of pride gone to seed, of a family holding on by determination alone. William drew the wagon to a gentle stop in the yard. In the gathering dusk, moths began dancing around the lantern Rose had lit, its warm glow spilling across her father's still face. The moment hung suspended between day and night, between crisis and whatever tomorrow might bring. The mountain man's original errand, 6 head of cattle for winter, seemed trivial now against the weight of human need before him. As he helped carry Jedediah into the house, William felt the subtle shift of fate redirecting his careful plans. Sometimes, he reflected, a man's path turned on moments of simple decency, leading him places he never meant to go. Inside, Doc Morrison began settling in for a long night's vigil. The sisters moved with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies and arranging the sick room. William stood in the doorway, watching this family face their crisis with quiet courage. His decision to stay, at least for now, settled into place without fanfare, as natural as water finding its level. Dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle rose and gold as William led Jensen's borrowed wagon team into the McGraw ranch yard. The morning air held that peculiar stillness that comes just before the world fully wakes, broken only by a rooster's distant crow and the soft nickering of horses. The ranch building stood clearly revealed in the growing light. What William hadn't fully seen in last night's darkness now showed plain, a place worn down by time and circumstance. The main house, though obviously swept and tended, needed fresh paint and new shingles. Fence posts leaned at tired angles, and the corrals wanted mending. Still, there was pride in how the yard was kept neat, the windows shining clean despite their weathered frames. He unhitched the team with practiced hands, speaking softly to settle the horses. The barn door creaked as he led them inside, the sound carrying across the quiet yard. The interior showed the same careful attention despite limited means. Every tool hung in its proper place, the straw fresh swept though thin on the floor. The house door opened, spilling lamplight into the pearl-gray dawn. Janice McGraw stepped out, a coffee pot in her trembling hands. "Mr. Harlan," she called softly. "There's coffee, if you'd care for some." William nodded, finishing with the horses before following her inside. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Janice's hands shook slightly as she poured 2 cups, but her movements were otherwise steady, practiced from years of managing a household. "How is he?" William asked, accepting the cup with a quiet thank you. "Rose is with him now." Janice's voice carried the weight of a sleepless night. "The fever broke around midnight, but he's still very weak." From somewhere upstairs came the sound of angry footsteps, then Clara's voice. "He ain't dying. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week neither." The steps moved back and forth, a caged tiger's pacing. "You hear me, Pa? You ain't leaving us yet?" Rose's gentler tones followed, too soft to make out the words, but the rhythm suggested prayer or comfort. William and Janice sat in silence, letting the coffee's warmth seep into tired muscles. William set his cup down carefully. "Miss Janice, if you're willing, I'd like to stay on a few days. Those corrals need fixing, and the cattle want tending while your father recovers." Janice's hands stilled on her cup. "Mr. Harlan, we can't pay." "No pay needed," he interrupted quietly. "It's the right thing to do." Before she could respond, the front door opened to admit Dr. Morrison, his medical bag in hand. The sisters gathered as he checked on Jedediah, their faces drawn with worry. "He must rest," the doctor announced firmly. "Complete rest, mind you. No working, no worrying about the ranch. His heart won't take the strain." "But the cattle," Clara began. "Either find help or sell them," Morrison cut in. "I mean it, girls. Your father's life depends on it." From the sickbed, Jedediah stirred. "The loan," he muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Them papers I signed." "Hush now, Pa," Rose soothed, but William caught the flash of fear that passed between the sisters. The doctor departed with fresh promises to return tomorrow. William spent the morning mending the worst breaks in the corral fence, the steady rhythm of hammer on nails matching the questions beating in his mind. What papers? What loan? The sisters' tension spoke of trouble deeper than their father's illness. The day passed in necessary work. William checked the cattle, repaired what he could, and kept his eyes open. The sisters fell into their own rhythm, Janice cooking and managing, Rose nursing their father, Clara alternating between fierce activity and angry pacing. As evening drew in, Janice called them to supper. The table was simply set but spotless, the food plain but well prepared. For a time, there was only the quiet sounds of eating. Then Rose spoke softly. "It's kind of you to help us, mister. Harlan, most men," she trailed off, looking down at her plate. Most men don't even look our way, Clara finished bluntly, except to laugh. Clara, Janice warned, but her sister pressed on. Well, it's true, ain't it? 3 seasons of socials, church meetings, barn raisings. Not one caller, not one offer of marriage, just whispers and jokes about the big McGraw girls. Her voice caught slightly, though her chin stayed high. The mountain keeps me from people too, William said quietly. Gets lonely up there sometimes. The admission hung in the air as Rose lit the lamp against the growing darkness. Its gentle light caught the sisters' faces, Janice's quiet dignity, Rose's soft compassion, Clara's defensive pride. William saw them clearly then, 3 women bearing up under weights no one should carry alone. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night. No one spoke for a long while, each lost in their own thoughts about loneliness and belonging, about the strange turns that bring people together in times of need. The silence held no awkwardness, just the shared understanding of those who know what it means to stand apart from the crowd. William sipped his coffee, watching the lamp's glow reflect in the window glass. Beyond his reflection, the dark shapes of the corrals waited for tomorrow's work. He had meant to stay in the high country through winter, but sometimes a man's plans had to yield to greater needs. Janice rose to clear the dishes, her movements quiet and efficient. Rose excused herself to check on their father. Clara remained at the table, absently tracing patterns in spilled salt with one finger. "Why'd you really stay?" she asked suddenly, her voice low but intense. "And don't say Christian charity." William considered his answer carefully. "Because it was right," he said finally. "No more, no less." Clara held his gaze for a long moment, searching for mockery or ulterior motives. Finding neither, she nodded once and left the table. The lamp burned lower as William sat in the quiet kitchen. Tomorrow would bring its own work and worries. For now, he simply let himself be present in this moment, in this house where 4 lonely souls had somehow found themselves sharing the same path, if only for a little while. Through the window came the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods. From upstairs drifted the soft murmur of Rose's voice reading scripture to their father. The familiar sounds of a ranch settling into night wrapped around the house like a well-worn blanket. William's original plan to winter alone in the high country seemed far away now, shifted by circumstance and choice. Whatever trouble lay behind Jedediah's muttered words about loans and papers, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he had made his decision. He would stay for now and help where he could. Days settled into a steady rhythm at the McGraw Ranch, as natural as breathing. William rose before the pale fingers of dawn could stretch across the sky, pulling on his boots by lantern light. The barn cats wound around his ankles as he made his morning checks, their soft meows a reminder that even the smallest creatures had come to accept his presence. The crunch of boots on gravel announced Janice's approach each morning. She carried a cloth-wrapped bundle of still warm biscuits and a tin of coffee, her practical nature showing in how she'd timed the baking to match his schedule. "Thought you might want something to keep you going," she'd say, handing him the package. Her eyes would linger on the broken fences stretching toward the horizon, worry creasing her brow despite her calm exterior. "Much obliged," William would reply, accepting the offering with careful hands. The biscuits were always perfect, golden brown and light as clouds. He noticed how she wrapped them in clean cloth despite the fabric's worn edges, maintaining dignity even in small things. Morning after morning, he worked his way along the fence lines. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as he replaced rotted posts and mended broken rails. His broad back bent to the task, muscles moving with the steady rhythm of the work. Sometimes he caught glimpses of the sisters going about their days, Janice hanging washing, Rose heading to town with her Bible and hymnal, Clara striding toward the cattle pens with determination in every step. Rose gathered the town's children twice a week for church lessons, her gentle spirit drawing them like moths to lamplight. Even the most restless boys settled when she opened her hymnal, her sweet voice lifting their young ones in song. The town mothers watched from doorways, their expressions mixing approval of Rose's teaching with the usual whispered comments about her size. Clara proved herself a force to be reckoned with at the cattle pens. Her sharp tongue and sharper mind cut through the drovers' attempts to undervalue their stock. "That heifer's worth $15 if she's worth a penny," she'd declare, hands on her hips. "And don't think I don't see that fine bull you're trying to hide behind them scrub steers." The drovers would shift uncomfortably, unused to a woman who knew cattle and wasn't afraid to show it. Some tried to stare her down, but Clara never flinched. She'd learned long ago that backing down only invited more mockery. William observed all this as he worked, seeing how each sister carried her burden with different strength. He kept to his tasks, speaking little but watching much. The ranch slowly began to show the effects of his care. Straighter fence lines, cleared irrigation ditches, repaired barn doors that no longer groaned in the wind. In town, tongues wagged as they always had, but with new flavor to their gossip. William caught fragments as he loaded supplies at the general store one afternoon. "Them fat McGraw girls," a voice drawled from behind the seed bins, "got themselves a mountain man working their place now. Reckon they're keeping him prisoner with their cooking." Laughter followed, mean-spirited and sharp. "Heard tell old Jedediah tried to sell them off to him right there at the cattle pens. Desperate times call for desperate measures, I reckon." William's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the feed sack until his knuckles showed white. But he kept loading his wagon, maintaining the same steady pace. Fighting wouldn't help the sisters. It would only give the gossips more to talk about. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the yard, the sound of the parlor organ drifted through the open windows. Rose's voice rose sweet and clear, singing an old hymn about grace and mercy. William paused in the doorway, his rough hands still dusty from the day's work. Rose's fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, though the instrument was badly out of tune in places. Her face showed pure joy as she played, all self-consciousness forgotten in the music. The evening light caught the tears on her cheeks, but they were gentle tears, the kind that come from a full heart rather than a broken one. The song ended, its final notes fading into the gathering dusk. Rose looked up, startled to find William there. "Oh, I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You didn't," he said quietly. "It was real nice." A cough from the hallway interrupted them as Jedediah shuffled into view, leaning heavily on his cane. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Now see here, Harlan," he started, another cough shaking his thin frame. "We can't afford to keep you on forever. Won't take charity, not even from a good man like yourself." William turned to face him fully. "Not asking for wages, Mr. McGraw. Just doing what needs doing." "But why?" This from Clara, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Her usual defensive tone held genuine curiosity now. William considered his answer carefully. "Because it's right," he said finally. "Sometimes that's reason enough." Janice appeared with Jedediah's medicine and a cup of willow bark tea, ever practical. "Pa, you should be resting. Dr. Morrison was very clear about that." As she helped her father back to his room, William caught the sisters exchanging glances. Something had shifted in the house's atmosphere, like the moment before a storm breaks. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Later, as crickets began their evening chorus, William sat on the porch steps cleaning his tools. The sisters moved about inside, their shadows passing across the lit windows as they prepared for night. The familiar sounds of dishes being washed, floorboards creaking, and quiet voices discussing tomorrow's tasks floated out to him. He thought about the mockery in town, the malicious whispers that followed these women who had done nothing to deserve such cruelty. His hands stilled on the saw he was oiling. The sisters' acceptance of him into their daily rhythm stood in stark contrast to the town's treatment of them. They had offered him simple kindness, fresh biscuits, clean water, a place at their table, without question or condition. The moon rose over the eastern pasture, painting the world in silver. From inside came the sound of Rose humming another hymn as she banked the fire for the night. Clara's voice rose briefly, sharp but not unkind, probably fussing over their father's medicine. Janice's steady footsteps moved from room to room, checking windows and doors. William returned to his task, the rhythm of the oiled cloth on steel matching the peaceful pulse of the household behind him. He hadn't planned on any of this when he'd ridden down from the high country, but sometimes a man's plans had to yield to greater needs. Sometimes doing what was right meant staying exactly where you were, even when others couldn't understand why. The night deepened around him, stars pricking through the darkening sky like distant lanterns. Tomorrow would bring more work, more town gossip to ignore, more fences to mend. But it would also bring Janice's biscuits, Rose's songs, and Clara's fierce determination. Somehow, without anyone quite noticing, these things had become as much a part of his day as sunrise and sunset. A whippoorwill called from the cottonwood grove, its lonely song floating across the quiet ranch. William finished with his tools and stood, his shadow stretching long in the moonlight. Inside, a lamp still burned in the kitchen window, welcoming him back to the warmth of the house. A week passed, bringing warmer days and the sweet scent of wildflowers to the valley. William hitched the wagon early one morning, preparing to take 2 calves to market with Clara. The sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when she strode from the house, her shawl wrapped tight against the dawn chill. "Ready?" she asked, climbing onto the wagon seat with practiced ease. William nodded, clicking to the horses. The wagon creaked into motion, wheels crunching on the gravel drive. They rode in silence for the first mile, watching the landscape unfold before them. The 2 calves shifted in the back, their soft lowing mixing with birdsong. Clara sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, but William could sense the tension in her shoulders. "Reckon we'll get a fair price today," he offered, keeping his eyes on the trail. Clara snorted. "Fair? In that town? Ain't nothing fair about how they treat us." Her voice carried years of bitter experience. "They see 3 fat sisters and a failing ranch. That's all they've ever seen." The wagon jolted over a rut, making them both grab the seat. When they steadied, Clara continued, softer now. "Sometimes I dream of just leaving, taking a train east, where nobody knows us, starting fresh." She turned her face away, but not before William caught the shine of tears she refused to let fall. "Mountains are hard teachers," William said after a while, his voice gentle. "Learned that living up high all those years. They don't care if you're hurting or tired. They'll kill you just the same." Clara looked at him sharply. "What's that got to do with anything?" "Running to new places don't solve what's inside," he said. "Found that out the hard way. Real dignity comes from standing your ground, even when others want you to fall." They traveled another mile in silence, Clara mulling over his words. The morning warmed around them, dew burning off the grass. Finally, she spoke again. "How do you do it? Stay so calm when they mock us?" William adjusted the reins. "Same way you keep working that ranch despite everything. One day at a time, doing what's right." The cattle yard came into view, already busy with morning trade. Clara's spine stiffened as they approached, and William saw several men nudge each other, pointing at their wagon. The whispers and snickers started before they'd even stopped. "Well, if it ain't the McGraw girl," one buyer called out, his voice carrying deliberate mockery. "Come to grace us with more of your pa's scrappy stock?" Clara jumped down from the wagon, her chin high. "2 fine calves worth $30 each if you've got eyes to see quality." Laughter rippled through the gathered men. "30? Girl, them runts ain't worth 15 together. But since it's you..." The buyer made a show of considering. "I'll offer $12. Each out of kindness, mind you." More laughter followed. Clara's hands balled into fists at her sides, but before she could speak, William stepped up beside her. His presence was quiet, but solid, like a mountain at her back. The laughter died away. "Ma'am," he said clearly, addressing Clara with formal respect, "would you show these gentlemen how those calves handle?" Clara shot him a quick glance, then moved to the wagon. She guided the calves out with skilled hands, demonstrating their sound legs and clear eyes. William stood watching, his stillness somehow making the buyer shift uncomfortably. $28 each, Clara declared finally, not a penny less. The main buyer opened his mouth, likely to mock again, but his eyes met William's steady gaze. Something passed between the men, an understanding perhaps, or a warning. The buyer cleared his throat. 25, he countered, his tone suddenly businesslike. 27, Clara shot back, and they settled at $26 per calf. As William helped count the money, he noticed Clara's hands were steady now, her movements confident. The other buyers drifted away, their entertainment spoiled by the fair dealing they'd been forced into. The ride home felt lighter, though neither spoke much. The empty wagon rattled over the familiar trail, kicking up dust in the afternoon sun. When they finally pulled into the ranch yard, Clara turned to William before climbing down. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "Thought you were just another man looking to mock us. I'm sorry for that." William touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. No need for sorry, just glad to help. Inside, Janice had a pot of stew simmering on the stove, its rich aroma filling the kitchen. Rose set the table while their father dozed in his chair by the window. They gathered around as the sun set, passing cornbread and trading quiet conversation about the day's work. "Barn roof's got a leak," Janice mentioned, ladling more stew into William's bowl. "Noticed it this morning when I was gathering eggs." "I'll patch it tomorrow," William replied, accepting the food with a nod of thanks. "You don't have to," Clara started, then stopped herself. "Much obliged," she said instead, surprising everyone with her gentle tone. Rose smiled and moved to the parlor organ. Her fingers found the keys, and soon a familiar hymn filled the house. William recognized it. Amazing Grace, its notes carrying peace into the gathering darkness outside. Jedediah stirred in his chair, coughing weakly. "Water rights," he muttered, his voice rough. "Them railroad men. Papers." He subsided into another coughing fit, waving away Janice's concerned approach. The hymn continued, Rose's sweet voice lifting above their father's coughs and the clinking of spoons against bowls. William looked around the table, at Janice's capable hands, Rose's gentle smile, Clara's proud profile softened by lamplight. Something had changed today, some barrier fallen away between them. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus. The barn roof would need fixing tomorrow, and there would be more battles to face in town. But tonight, in this warm kitchen filled with hymn music and the scent of stew, William felt the rightness of his choice to stay. Sometimes dignity meant standing firm, and sometimes it meant standing together. Dawn broke cold and clear over the McGraw Ranch. William stood on the newly patched barn roof, hammering down the last shingle as golden light spilled across the valley. The creek sparkled below, its waters threading through pastures where cattle grazed in the morning mist. He paused to wipe sweat from his brow, satisfied with the repair work. The sound of approaching hooves drew his attention. 3 riders appeared on the road, their clothes and manner marking them as city men rather than ranchers. The leader wore a fine wool suit and derby hat, his leather satchel gleaming with brass fixtures. Behind him rode 2 younger men carrying surveying equipment, transit levels, measuring chains, and wooden stakes. William climbed down the ladder as the men dismounted in the yard. Janice stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Clara emerged from the barn, leading a milk cow, her expression darkening at the sight of the visitors. "Good morning," the well-dressed man called out, his tone carefully pleasant. "I'm Mr. Henderson, surveyor for the Western Pacific Railroad Company." He removed his hat with a slight bow to Janice. "We're here about the water rights assessment." "What water rights?" Clara demanded, dropping the cow's lead rope. "Why, the creek rights, of course," Henderson gestured to the sparkling water. "As per the agreement with your father some years back." He opened his satchel, withdrawing a thick sheaf of papers. "All quite properly documented, I assure you." Rose appeared in the doorway behind Janice, her face pale. "Papa never mentioned selling water rights." "Fetch your father, please," Henderson said, his smile never wavering. "I'm sure he can explain everything." William watched the sisters exchange worried glances. Janice disappeared inside, returning moments later with Jedediah leaning heavily on her arm. The old man squinted at Henderson, then at the papers in his hand. His weathered face went ashen. "Now see here," Henderson began, unfolding the documents with practiced efficiency. 3 years ago, your father signed an agreement granting the railroad certain considerations regarding Clear Creek, in exchange for a rather generous loan, I might add. "What loan?" Clara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Papa?" Jedediah sagged against the porch railing. There was a bad year. Cattle dying. Bank wouldn't help." His voice came rough with shame. "Railroad men offered money. Said they just needed to measure the creek." "Measure it for what?" William asked quietly, moving to stand beside Clara. Henderson's smile tightened. "For necessary improvements, of course." The railroad requires significant water resources for our new line through the valley. According to these documents, we have full rights to divert the creek as needed. He gestured to his assistants who began unloading their equipment. We're here to begin the preliminary survey. Divert it? Rose's voice quavered. But our cattle, our gardens. The railroad will ensure all property owners receive their fair share, Henderson said smoothly. Though I should mention that share may be somewhat reduced from current levels. Clara snatched the papers from his hands, eyes scanning rapidly. This can't be legal. Papa was sick that year. His mind wasn't right. The contract bears his signature, witnessed and notarized. Henderson retrieved the documents with practiced ease. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to begin. William stepped forward, his quiet presence making Henderson pause. Mind if I look at those papers? They're quite technical, mister? Harlan, William Harlan. Henderson hesitated, then handed over the contract with obvious reluctance. William read slowly, his finger tracing each line. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases stood out clearly. Complete authority. Unrestricted access. Perpetual rights. When does this take effect? William asked. Construction begins next month. Henderson checked his pocket watch. The water division will commence immediately after. Now, if you'll... We'll need to confirm these documents, William cut in. With a lawyer. Henderson's smile vanished. The contract is binding, mister. Harlan, your interest in the matter is noted, but this is between the railroad and Mr. McGraw. He turned to his men. Begin the survey. Start at the bend by the Willow Grove. The assistants moved off with their equipment. Henderson mounted his horse, looking down at the gathered family. I suggest you begin preparing for reduced water access. Good day to you all. He touched his hat brim and rode toward the creek. Silence fell in the yard. Jedediah slumped further against the railing, his breathing labored. Rose hurried to support him while Janice ran for his medicine. How could you? Clara rounded on her father, tears of rage in her eyes. How could you sign away our water without telling us? Clara, Rose pleaded, he was sick that year, remember? The fever. We'll lose everything, Clara continued, her voice breaking. The cattle will die without water. The gardens will wither. They're stealing our land without even buying it. William touched her arm gently. Let's take this inside, he said, nodding toward Jedediah's pale face. Need to talk this through calm-like. They helped Jedediah to his chair by the kitchen stove. Janice poured coffee with trembling hands while Rose pressed a cool cloth to their father's forehead. Clara paced the worn floorboards, occasionally pausing to glare out the window at the surveyors by the creek. There has to be a way to fight this, she insisted. They tricked him, took advantage when he was sick. William sat at the table, his big hands wrapped around the coffee cup. Need to know if that contract's proper legal first, he said. Could be flaws in it. Railroad men ain't always careful with details when they're in a hurry. But who can help us? Rose asked softly. We can't afford a fancy lawyer. Janice set down the coffee pot with careful deliberation. What about Reverend Alden? She suggested. He's been circuit riding for 20 years. Seen plenty of railroad dealings in other towns. And he was here that year Papa was sick. He might remember something useful. The preacher, Clara scoffed. What good can prayers do against railroad money? He's educated, Janice persisted, reads legal papers for folks who can't. And he's honest. Won't be bought off by railroad men. William nodded slowly. Might be right at that. Preacher sees a lot, traveling between towns. Hears things too. I remember. Jedediah spoke suddenly, his voice weak. Alden was here. When they brought the papers. He said something. The old man's face creased with effort, but the memory slipped away. We'll lose it all, Rose whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. The ranch, our home. Those thieving railroad bastards, Clara spat. Coming here with their fine clothes and fancy papers, stealing what's ours. Clara, Janice admonished quietly. Language. William stood, his chair scraping the floor. First thing is finding Reverend Alden. He still make regular stops in town? Wednesdays usually, Rose said, at the church. That's tomorrow. William looked around the kitchen, meeting each worried face in turn. We'll ride in, show him the situation. Meanwhile, Best keep civil with those surveyors. Don't want to give them cause for complaint. Clara opened her mouth to argue, but something in William's steady gaze made her stop. She nodded grudgingly. They finished supper in heavy silence, broken only by the steady tick-tock of the mantel clock and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. No one had much appetite. Outside, they could hear the surveyors calling measurements to each other along the creek bank. As darkness fell, the sisters cleared the table while William carried more firewood inside. The evening tasks were performed automatically, each person lost in their own worried thoughts. Jedediah dozed in his chair, mumbling occasionally about papers and promises. When the kitchen was clean and the house locked up for the night, William headed out to the barn. The sisters' light glowed briefly in their upstairs window, then winked out. He climbed to the loft where he'd made his bed, the fresh hay crackling under his blanket. Lying there in the darkness, listening to the horses shift below and the night wind in the rafters, William stared upward, sleep eluding him. The family's predicament turned over and over in his mind. He'd come down from the mountains, seeking only cattle and solitude. Instead, he'd found these proud, wounded people, a sick father, 3 daughters fighting against scorn and hardship, a ranch hanging by a thread. Their fight was his now, he realized. Somewhere in these past weeks, between mending fences and sharing meals, between standing up to mockers and working alongside Clara, he'd become part of their struggle. The thought should have troubled him, should have sent him running back to his beloved mountains. Instead, he felt a curious peace. The railroad men might have money and power and fancy papers, but they didn't understand this land or the people who worked it. They didn't know what it meant to draw life from creek water, to nurse sick cattle through winter, to watch sun and rain shape the seasons of survival. The mantel clock in the house chimed 10, its sound carrying clearly through the night air. William rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket closer. Tomorrow they'd seek the preacher's counsel. Tomorrow they'd begin to fight back. But tonight, in the quiet barn loft, he let himself remember Clara's fierce eyes, Janice's steady hands, Rose's gentle faith. Whatever came next, he would stand with them. Sleep finally found him as clouds drifted past the moon, casting shifting shadows through the barn's weathered boards. Below, the horses dreamed their secret dreams, while up in the house, 3 sisters slept fitfully, their world balanced on the edge of change. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the morning air crisp with early autumn. William had already fed the horses when he heard movement from the house. The sisters emerged one by one, dressed in their Sunday best. Plain but clean dresses, pressed carefully for church. Janice carried a basket of fresh biscuits. "For after service," she explained, setting it on the porch rail. "Will you join us today, William?" He hesitated, brushing hay from his coat. It had been years since he'd sat in a proper church, preferring to find his worship in mountain stillness. But something in their hopeful faces made him nod. "Reckon I could clean up some?" Clara snorted softly. "Might take more than cleaning, mountain man." But there was a hint of teasing in her voice. Rose appeared with a clean shirt and string tie. These were father's before he took ill. "Might fit you." William accepted the clothes with careful hands. "Much obliged." While the sisters helped Jedediah into the wagon, William changed in the barn. The shirt was a bit tight across his shoulders, but the tie settled properly at his throat. He'd polished his boots and combed his hair, though it still showed traces of its usual wildness. The wagon creaked as they made their way into town, the morning sun warming their backs. Church bells rang across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. Other wagons and riders converged on the white-painted building, dust rising from the road. William helped Jedediah down, steadying the older man's uncertain steps. The sisters gathered their skirts, climbing down with practiced grace despite their size. Already William could hear the whispers starting, see the sidelong glances from other churchgoers. "Look who's come to Sunday service, is those McGraw girls bold as you please, and their mountain man in tow." Rose lifted her chin, leading the way up the church steps. Janice and Clara followed, with William helping Jedediah bring up the rear. They settled into a pew near the back, the wood creaking beneath them. The little church filled quickly with ranch families and townsfolk in their Sunday finery. Children fidgeted in starched collars while mothers shushed them quietly. The air grew warm with so many bodies pressed close. Reverend Alden took his place at the pulpit, his weather-worn face solemn above his black coat. The morning light streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes in its beams. "Let us pray," the preacher began, and heads bowed throughout the room. William closed his eyes but remained aware of the McGraw sisters beside him. Rose's gentle presence, Janice's steady calm, Clara's barely contained energy. The prayer washed over him like mountain stream water. When the Reverend began his sermon, his words carried clear to the rafters. He spoke of God's special love for those the world rejected, of Christ dining with outcasts and sinners. William felt the words settle deep in his chest. "The Lord does not see as man sees," Reverend Alden declared. "Man looks at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." A rustling went through the congregation, several heads turned toward the McGraw pew. William saw Clara's hands clench in her lap. Then Rose stood for the hymn, her voice lifting pure and clear above the general singing. The familiar words of "Amazing Grace" soared from her throat like a dove taking wing. One by one, other voices fell silent until only Rose's remained, filling the church with such beauty that even the children sat still. When the last note faded, silence held for a long moment before the congregation stirred back to life. William saw tears on several faces, quickly dabbed away with handkerchiefs. After the final prayer, people began filing out into the sunshine. William helped Jedediah to his feet while the sisters gathered their things. They made their way slowly down the aisle, aware of the murmurs and stares following them. Outside on the church steps, Frank Turner, a local rancher, stood with several other men. As the McGraws passed, he spoke loud enough to carry. "Seems even livestock's welcome at worship these days, though some might say trading daughters is worse than trading cattle." The sisters stiffened. Jedediah's face flushed dark red. Before anyone could move, William stepped forward, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the Sunday morning air. "Those words ain't fitting for any day, Mr. Turner, especially not the Lord's Day." His eyes held the ranchers steadily. "These ladies have more worth than you reckon. More dignity, too, seems to me." Turner opened his mouth, then closed it at something he saw in William's steady gaze. The other men shifted uncomfortably. "Just repeating what I heard," Turner muttered finally. "Then best hear something new," William replied. "Hear that they're daughters of God, same as any here. Worthy of respect." He turned away, effectively ending the confrontation. The crowd parted as he helped Jedediah toward their wagon. The sisters followed, heads high despite their burning cheeks. Once they were underway, Clara broke the tension. "Well, well. Quite the sermon yourself there, mountain man. Didn't know you had such fine words in you." "Weren't fine words needed," William said, "just truth." Rose reached over to squeeze his arm briefly. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode home in companionable quiet, the autumn sun warm on their shoulders. The land rolled away on either side, their land threatened now by railroad men and water rights, but still home. Janice prepared a simple Sunday dinner while Rose helped their father to his chair. Clara and William saw to the evening chores, working together with the ease of growing familiarity. When they gathered at the table, Jedediah seemed more tired than usual. He picked at his food, his face drawn with more than physical pain. "Need to say something," he began finally, his voice rough. "Been weighing heavy on me." The sisters paused, looking at their father with concern. "About them papers I signed." Jedediah's hands trembled slightly on the tablecloth. "Was wrong of me. Should have told you girls what I done. Was sick that year, fever making my mind cloudy. Railroad men came with their smooth talk about development and progress, promised good money for water rights." He drew a shaking breath. "Should have known better. Should have protected what was yours." "Papa, don't," Rose said softly. "You were ill. No excuse for a father betraying his children's future." Jedediah's voice cracked. "Can you forgive an old fool?" Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Nothing to forgive, Papa. We'll fight them together." "All of us," Janice added firmly. "Those railroad men don't know what they're up against," Rose said with unusual fire. William watched the family draw together in their determination, seeing strength in their unity that no legal paper could match. The evening light slanted golden through the windows, touching each face with warmth. The weak but loving father, the three proud sisters, different as could be but bound by blood and loyalty. The mantel clock ticked steadily in the silence that followed, marking time in a home that might soon be lost, but would never be given up without a fight. The late summer sun warmed the meadow as wagons rolled in for the county picnic. Quilts dotted the grass like scattered flowers, while fiddle music drifted on the breeze. Children darted between blankets, their laughter mixing with the calls of blue jays in the oak trees above. William guided the McGraw wagon to a shady spot near the edge of the gathering. He helped Jedediah down carefully, noting how the old man's breathing had worsened in recent days. The sisters climbed down one by one, each carrying baskets loaded with their contributions to the community feast. Quite a turnout, Janice observed, straightening her apron. She'd spent the previous day baking enough biscuits to feed half the county, determined to show their worth through hospitality. Clara clutched her covered pie tin, knuckles white against the metal. She'd practiced for weeks, determined to enter the contest despite never having won before. Rose carried her tambourine, having been asked to help lead the children's games. As they made their way toward the crowd, the usual whispers followed. McGraw girls. Mountain Man still with them. Hear about the railroad dispute? William walked tall beside them, his quiet presence a shield against the gossip. He'd trimmed his beard and wore his Sunday shirt, though his weathered face and calloused hands still marked him as a man more at home in the high country than social gatherings. The afternoon unfolded in waves of activity. Janice set up her basket near the main food tables, and soon small children were tugging at her skirts, begging for warm biscuits drizzled with honey. She handed them out with a gentle smile, her natural kindness drawing people past their prejudices. "Best biscuits in the county, Miss McGraw," old Mrs. Peterson admitted, helping herself to seconds. "Light as clouds." Rose joined the preacher's wife in organizing games, her clear voice leading the young ones in Ring Around the Rosie and Duck, Duck, Goose. The children's innocent acceptance of her warmed the hearts of watching parents. Clara stood nervously before the pie contest table, setting down her apple creation among the others. She'd woven the crust in an intricate lattice pattern, something she'd practiced in secret during the pre-dawn hours. "Didn't expect to see you here," Martha Wilson said, adjusting her own perfect cherry pie. "Thought you were too busy with that mountain man of yours." Clara lifted her chin. "Reckon there's room enough for both baking and ranching in a woman's life, Mrs. Wilson." William moved through the crowd quietly, speaking little but watching everything. He noted how the sisters worked to build bridges despite the town's lingering judgment. Their dignity in the face of mockery stirred something deep in his chest. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, people gathered for the contest results. Clara stood at the back, trying to appear unconcerned. The judge, Mrs. Henderson, tasted each pie carefully. "Third place goes to Mrs. Wilson's cherry pie," she announced. "Second to Mrs. Baker's peach. And first place," she paused, checking her notes. "First place goes to Miss Clara McGraw's apple pie." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Her sisters beamed with pride. "The lattice work is exquisite," Mrs. Henderson continued, "and the balance of spices perfect." Before anyone could comment further, William stepped forward. He'd been waiting for the right moment, and something told him it had come. The crowd fell silent as he cleared his throat. "Folks," he began, his voice carrying across the meadow, "got something needs saying." He looked at the sisters, standing together as always. "When I came down from the mountains, wasn't looking for anything but cattle. Found something worth far more instead." The silence deepened as people leaned in to listen. "Found 3 women who work harder than any men I know. Found faith lived quiet and true, not just spoke on Sundays. Found loyalty to family and land that don't bend with hard times." His eyes found Clara's. "Found courage wearing a shape this town's been too blind to see proper." Martha Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Several men looked at their boots. "These sisters, they ain't what you've been calling them. Their worth ain't in meeting your ideas of beauty. It's in hands that know honest work, hearts that stay kind despite unkindness, spirits that bend but don't break." Tears ran freely down Rose's cheeks now. Janice stood straighter, chin high. William turned fully to Clara, taking a step toward her. "Miss Clara McGraw." His voice gentled. I'm asking proper here before God and neighbors. Would you allow me to court you, not bought or bargained for, but free, as a woman deserves?" The crowd gasped. Clara's pie tin clattered to the ground. Her hands trembled as she stared at William, seeing in his steady gaze everything she'd never dared hope for: respect, understanding, and something deeper still. Through tears, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." A moment of stunned silence held. Then Rose began to clap. Janice joined in, and suddenly the whole gathering was applauding. Even Mrs. Wilson managed a grudging smile. The sun was setting as they loaded the wagon for home. Children waved goodbye to Janice, begging promises of more biscuits. Rose hugged the preacher's wife, while Clara carefully packed her blue ribbon with her prize-winning pie plate. Back at the ranch, they lit the lanterns in the yard. The evening air was sweet with late summer grass and early autumn chill. William helped Jedediah to his chair on the porch, where the old man could watch his daughters moving in and out of the lamplight. "Never thought to see this day," Jedediah said softly. "Reckon I judged wrong at first meeting, William." "Reckon we all did some wrong judging," William replied. "Grace is getting another chance to see true." The sisters gathered on the porch steps. Rose brought out her tambourine, its gentle chime accompanying their voices as they sang an evening hymn. The sound drifted across the darkening yard, up into the star-filled sky. When the song ended, William bowed his head. "Might we pray together?" They joined hands in a circle, their shadows thrown long by the lantern light. William's deep voice carried their thanks heavenward, for family found, for hope renewed, for love freely given and received. Clara's hand was warm in his, her fingers intertwined with quiet certainty. For the first time since the railroad men had threatened their water rights, since Jedediah had confessed his desperate deal, hope felt solid enough to build on. The crickets sang in the grass. A cool breeze carried the scent of Clara's apple pie through the open kitchen window, and in the lantern's glow, 4 women and 2 men bowed their heads together, bound now by something stronger than necessity, bound by choice, by faith, and by love. Dawn painted the sky in hopeful hues of pink and gold, but the peace wouldn't last. The morning dew still clung to the grass when hoofbeats approached the McGraw ranch, carrying with them a shadow that would darken more than just the day. William stood at the water trough, splashing his face after the morning chores, when he heard the horse approaching. The rider sat straight-backed on a gleaming bay stallion, his city clothes marking him as clearly as a branded steer. A leather document case was tucked under one arm. Clara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She squinted at the approaching figure, her shoulders tensing. "Railroad man," she muttered, voice thick with distaste. The lawyer dismounted with practiced grace, his polished boots seeming to avoid the dust itself. His thin lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile, but looked more like a crack in dried clay. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth as snake oil. "I trust I find the McGraw family well?" He didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "I'm Theodore Blackwood, legal counsel for the Western Pacific Railroad Company." William stepped forward, positioning himself between the lawyer and Clara. "State your business." Blackwood's smile didn't waver as he opened his case, extracting a sheaf of papers, merely ensuring all parties understand their obligations. He held up the documents, letting them catch the morning light. "These papers, signed by Mr. Jedediah McGraw himself, clearly transfer all water rights from Clear Creek to the Western Pacific Railroad Company." Clara's sharp intake of breath cut through the morning air. "That's not possible. Pa would never." "I assure you, madam, he did." Blackwood's voice carried a note of false sympathy. "His signature is quite clear. Would you care to examine it?" William took the papers, his weathered hands careful with the crisp documents. His eyes narrowed as he read, taking in every word. There, near the bottom, was indeed Jedediah's signature. But something wasn't right. The clause about water rights had been added in different ink, the paper slightly discolored around it. "This has been altered," William said quietly, his tone carrying the weight of mountain winters. "The water rights clause wasn't there when he signed." Blackwood's smile turned cold. A serious accusation, Mr. Harlan, one that would need to be proven in court. He straightened his jacket. And we both know how courts tend to view such disputes between humble ranchers and progress itself. The screen door creaked and Janice appeared, drawn by the voices. Rose stood behind her, both sisters watching with growing concern. Without water, cattle can't survive, Blackwood continued, his voice carrying just enough for all to hear. And land without cattle or water becomes, shall we say, considerably less valuable. The railroad would be happy to take such a burden off your hands, for a modest sum, of course. Clara's hands balled into fists. You're nothing but thieves in fine clothes. Careful, Miss McGraw. Blackwood's voice hardened. Slander is a serious matter. Now, I suggest you all discuss this among yourselves. The railroad's offer won't remain open indefinitely. He mounted his horse with the same practiced grace. Good day to you all. They watched him ride away, dust rising behind him like the wake of a serpent. The morning's hope had turned to ashes in their mouths. Inside the house, they found Jedediah already awake, propped up in his chair. One look at their faces told him everything. He came, didn't he? The railroad man? William laid the papers on the table. The water rights clause was added after you signed, Jedediah. It's forged. The old rancher's face crumpled. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead a harsh cough racked his body. When he pulled his handkerchief away, bright spots of blood stained the white cloth. Pah! Rose rushed to his side, but he waved her off. Get me to bed, he wheezed. Need to rest a spell. William and Clara helped him to his feet. His body seemed lighter than before, as if the weight of guilt and sickness had worn away at his very substance. They got him settled in his bed, where he fell into a fitful sleep, his breathing labored. The doctor was sent for, but his visit brought little comfort. Keep him comfortable, was all he would say, his grave expression speaking volumes more than his words. The day dragged on, heavy with unspoken fears. Janice went through the motions of preparing supper, though nobody felt much like eating. Rose tended to their father, singing hymns softly as he slept. Clara paced like a caged mountain cat, her anger having nowhere to go. When evening finally came, they gathered around the table out of habit more than hunger. The usual prayer was short, their hearts too heavy for more. Forks scraped against plates in the silence, each lost in their own thoughts of what might come. The meal ended early, dishes done in silence. As darkness settled over the prairie, William stepped out onto the porch. He pulled his pipe from his pocket, but didn't light it, just held it while he stared out at the land that had become home. The screen door creaked behind him. Clara's footsteps were soft as she came to stand beside him, her presence as familiar now as his own shadow. I'm scared, William, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared of losing the land. Scared of losing Pa. She paused, swallowing hard. Scared of losing you. William turned to her, seeing in the fading light how fear had stripped away her usual fierce pride. He reached out, taking her hand in his. You won't lose me, Clara, he said firmly. This land, your family, they've become my own. I aim to fight for what's right. But the lawyer said, I don't care what he said. William's voice was quiet but carried the strength of granite. There's more than one way to fight injustice. The Lord provides wisdom to those who ask. The prairie wind picked up, carrying their words away into the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that seemed to echo their own uncertainty. Clara's hand tightened in his. I never thought I'd find someone who'd stand with us like this. When Pa first offered us that day at the cattle pens, she shook her head. Seems like a lifetime ago. The Lord works in ways we don't expect, William said softly. Brings people together for his purpose, even when we can't see it clear at first. They stood together in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. The ranch lay quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, the chickens roosting, the horses drowsing in their stalls. All this, built by generations of McGraw sweat and determination, now threatened by men who saw only profit where others saw home. From inside came the sound of Rose starting evening prayers, her sweet voice carrying through the screen door. Janice joined in, the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm floating out into the night air. "The Lord is my shepherd," they sang, "I shall not want." Clara's voice caught as she tried to join in. William's hand squeezed hers gently, offering strength when words failed. The prairie wind continued its lonely song, carrying their fears and hopes alike into the vast darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they stood together, finding comfort in shared strength and unspoken prayers. Through the window, the lamp's glow cast long shadows across the porch, a reminder of the light that remains even in the darkest times. The future might be uncertain, but in this moment, Clara and William held fast to what they knew was true, that love, faith, and justice were worth fighting for no matter the cost. Inside, Jedediah's cough echoed through the house, a harsh reminder of time's passage and battles yet to come. But out here on the porch, in the quiet of the evening, William and Clara found a moment of peace in each other's presence, drawing strength for whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun had barely touched the eastern horizon when William stepped out onto the McGraw Ranch's porch. His saddlebags were packed tight, his horse already stamping impatiently at the hitching post. The cool dawn air carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, promising another hot day ahead. Inside the kitchen, lamplight glowed warm against the windows. The sisters had risen early to see him off. Janice wrapped still warm bread in a cloth, tucking it carefully into his saddlebag along with a tin of coffee. Her practical nature showed in how she'd thought to include matches and an extra cup. "The bread should keep 2 days," she said, adjusting the wrapping, "though it's best eaten fresh." Rose stood nearby, twisting her apron in her hands. "We'll pray for your safe journey, mister." "Harlan." Clara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her face tight with worry despite her attempt to appear unconcerned. "Don't let those railroad men fool you with their fancy words." William nodded, checking his horse's cinch one last time. "Truth has its own power," he said quietly. "Sometimes it just needs someone to speak it." The sisters watched as he mounted up, the leather creaking beneath him. The morning light caught Clara's face, and for a moment, her usual sharp expression softened. "Be careful," she said, barely above a whisper. William touched the brim of his hat, then turned his horse toward the eastern trail. Behind him, the sisters stood together on the porch, their figures growing smaller as he rode away. The morning sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass, and dust rose in small clouds beneath his horse's hooves. The journey to the county seat stretched long before him. 25 miles of open country lay between the McGraw Ranch and the courthouse, a full day's ride, even pushing hard. William settled into the saddle rhythm, his mind turning over the task ahead. Finding proof of forgery wouldn't be simple. Railroad companies had deep pockets and friends in high places. The morning wore on into afternoon. William stopped briefly at noon to water his horse at a creek and eat some of Janice's bread. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat darkened his shirt. Dust coated his throat, making him grateful for the water in his canteen. It was late afternoon when he finally rode into the county seat. The town was larger than the one near the McGraw Ranch, with brick buildings lining the main street and a proper courthouse standing proud on the square. William tied his horse at the public trough, noting how the animal's flanks were dark with sweat. The clerk's office occupied a corner of the courthouse's first floor. Inside, the air was still and warm, heavy with the smell of old paper and ink. A thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from his desk. "Can I help you?" William removed his hat. "Need to see loan records McGraw Ranch filed about 3 years back." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. "Public records require a formal request. There's a fee." William placed coins on the desk. "I'm prepared to pay." What followed were hours of painstaking search through leather-bound volumes and dusty files. The clerk, though initially reluctant, proved helpful once he understood William's purpose. Together, they traced the history of the McGraw loan through various documents. "Here," the clerk said finally, pointing to an entry. "Original loan filing, dated March 15th, 1879. William leaned close, studying the document. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the writing was clear. More importantly, there was no mention of water rights in the original terms. "Need to see any amendments or changes filed after," William said. The clerk nodded, returning to the shelves. More hours passed. The afternoon light slanting through the windows grew golden, then dim. William's eyes ached from studying cramped handwriting, but he pressed on. Finally, in a separate file, they found what they sought. The water rights clause had been added 6 months after the original filing, but the paper was different, the ink newer. Most telling was Jedediah's signature, similar, but not quite right. "This here," William said, pointing to the altered document. "Can you verify when this was actually filed?" The clerk adjusted his spectacles, frowning at the paper. "According to the registry," he checked another book. "Strange. The amendment date doesn't match our record book. And look here, the notary seal is smudged. Almost like it was added later," William finished quietly. The clerk looked uncomfortable but nodded. "I can make official copies if you'd like. For the court." "Please." It was full dark by the time William left the courthouse, but he carried something precious in his saddlebags, certified copies of both the original loan and the altered document, along with the clerk's official notation of the discrepancies. He spent the night at the town's small hotel, rising before dawn to begin the journey home. His horse, rested from the night's stay, moved quickly through the morning cool. The sun climbed high, then began its westward slide as he pushed on, stopping only briefly to rest his mount. Evening was settling over the prairie when he finally caught sight of the McGraw ranch. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and figures moved on the porch, holding lanterns up to pierce the gathering darkness. "William!" Clara's voice carried across the yard as he rode up. The sisters hurried down the porch steps, lanterns swaying, their faces eager for news. William dismounted stiffly, his legs sore from 2 days of hard riding. "Let's go inside," he said. "Need to show you what I found." They gathered around the kitchen table, Janice, Rose, and Clara leaning close as William spread out the papers. Even Jedediah had been helped to a chair, wrapped in a quilt despite the evening's warmth. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were alert. "See here," William pointed to the original document. "This is the loan you signed, Jedediah. No mention of water rights." He laid the second paper beside it. "This amendment was filed later. Look at the signature. Similar, but not yours." "The railroad men," Jedediah wheezed. "They came back months after. Wanted me to sign more papers. I refused." "So they forged it," Clara said, her voice hard with anger. William nodded. "The clerk found proof in the registry. Dates don't match, papers different. Even the notary seal isn't right." Rose clasped her hands together. "Then we can fight them?" "Yes," William said simply, "we have proof now. The judge will have to see the truth of it." A smile touched Jedediah's pale face. "Perhaps," he whispered, "justice still lives in this territory after all." Janice wiped tears from her eyes while Rose began humming a hymn of thanksgiving. Clara stood straight, her chin lifted proudly, though William could see her hands trembling slightly. "The railroad won't give up easily," she warned. "They'll fight this." "Let them," William replied quietly. "Truth's on our side now." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The air had grown heavy, promising storms. But inside the McGraw kitchen, hope burned bright as the lamp flame. William watched the family's faces, Jedediah's peaceful smile, Rose's quiet joy, Janice's practical relief, and Clara's fierce pride. Something profound had shifted, like the weather before rain. They had a chance now, a real chance to save their home. The thunder growled again, closer this time. Rose moved to close the windows against the coming rain, while Janice began preparing a late supper. Clara caught William's eye across the table, and in her gaze he saw both gratitude and determination. The fight wasn't over, but they were no longer defenseless against the railroad's schemes. Jedediah coughed, and Rose hurried to help him back to his bed. The old rancher's steps were weak, but his voice was stronger than it had been in days as he thanked William. Soon the sound of rain began pattering against the roof, its rhythm steady and sure, like justice slowly but certainly approaching. The storm struck like a hammer blow, turning morning into twilight. Rain lashed against the windows of the McGraw ranch house as thunder shook the glass in its panes. William stood at the kitchen door, watching sheets of water cascade from the eaves. The weather had swept in from the west, bringing with it a fierce determination to drench everything in sight. "Roof's leaking in the barn," Janice called from behind him, her voice raised over the drumming rain. I can see water dripping near the hay storage. William nodded, already reaching for his oilskin coat. Better see to it before we lose good feed. Together they dashed across the muddy yard, boots splashing through growing puddles. The barn door groaned as they pushed it open against the wind. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horse were overshadowed by the damp earthiness of rain on wood. Sure enough, water dripped steadily from several spots in the roof, creating dark patches in the hay below. William climbed the ladder to the loft, Janice following with a lantern. The dim light revealed gaps where shingles had worked loose over the years. "Hand me those spare shingles," William called down. Working together, they began the careful process of patching the worst leaks. Despite the seriousness of their task, Janice found herself smiling at William's quiet determination. "Papa always meant to fix these leaks," she said, passing up another shingle. "But something always needed doing more urgent-like." "Reckon that's the way of ranch life," William replied, hammering carefully. "Always more work than hours in the day." A particularly loud crack of thunder made them both jump, then laugh at their shared startlement. It was a comfortable sort of moment, the kind that comes from working alongside someone you trust. Back in the house, Rose sat beside Jedediah's bed, her Bible open on her lap. The old man's breathing was labored, but his eyes were bright as she read from the Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd," her clear voice carried over the storm's rumble. "I shall not want." Clara paced the parlor like a caged mountain cat, pausing now and then to peer through rain-streaked windows. The forced inaction wore at her nerves. She was used to doing, fighting, working, not waiting while nature held them hostage. "You'll wear a track in that floor," Rose called gently from the bedroom doorway. Clara snorted. "Better than sitting still while everything hangs by a thread." "The Lord works in his own time," Rose replied, her faith steady as always. "Well, he could work a mite faster," Clara muttered, but there was more worry than bite in her words. The first day of storms passed slowly into evening. William and Janice managed to patch the worst of the barn leaks, though they ended up soaked despite the oilskins. Supper was a quiet affair, everyone tired from weather watching and worry. The second day dawned as gray as the first. Rain continued its assault, though the thunder had moved east. William found more leaks to patch, this time with Clara insisting on helping. Her determination to be useful overcame her usual prickly independence. "Hold the lantern higher," she directed, balancing on the loft ladder. "Can't see where this drip's coming from." William complied, watching as she traced the water's path with careful fingers. There was something different about her today, a softening around her eyes, though her jaw remained set in its usual stubborn line. "There," she said finally, "shingles split clean through. Pass me a new one?" They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional request for tools or materials. When the job was done, Clara lingered in the loft, looking out through a gap in the barn boards at the rain-soaked world. "Thank you," she said suddenly, not looking at William. "For staying. For helping. For—" She gestured vaguely at the patched roof. "All of it." William simply nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. Inside the house, Rose continued her vigil with Jedediah, reading scripture and singing hymns in her sweet, clear voice. The old man dozed between passages, his face peaceful despite his labored breathing. "The Lord is my light and my salvation," Rose read softly. "Whom shall I fear?" Janice kept everyone fed with simple but filling meals, cornbread, beans, and salt pork. She moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, finding comfort in the familiar routines of cooking and cleaning. On the morning of the third day, the rain finally began to slack. Weak sunlight filtered through breaking clouds, making the puddles in the yard gleam like scattered mirrors. The air felt washed clean, carrying the fresh scent of wet earth and growing things. The telegraph boy's arrival was heralded by splashing hoofbeats. He carried a yellow envelope, carefully protected from the weather inside his coat. Clara met him at the gate, practically snatching the message from his hands. Inside, the family gathered around as she read the telegram aloud. "Will testify stop remember dealings with railroad men. Stop arrival next week. God willing, stop Reverend Alden." "Praise be," Rose whispered, reaching for Janice's hand. "The preacher remembers," Jedediah said from his chair, his voice weak but clear. "He was there. That day they first came. Saw them pressure me to sign." William nodded slowly. His word carries weight. People trust him. And he ain't afraid of the railroad men, Clara added, hope kindling in her eyes. That evening, Janice prepared a simple stew, the savory smell filling the house. Though their circumstances hadn't changed, spirits were notably lighter around the supper table. Even Clara managed to eat without her usual restless energy. William watched her across the table, noting how the lamplight softened her features. She caught him looking once and held his gaze, a slight flush coloring her cheeks before she returned to her bowl. The hard edges that had first drawn his attention were still there, but now he saw them for what they were, armor protecting a heart capable of great feeling. Later, as evening drew its purple curtain across the sky, lightning still flickered in the distance, nature's own lanterns marking the storm's retreat. William stood on the porch, his customary pipe unlit in his hands. The boards were still damp beneath his feet, but the air held the promise of drying days ahead. Without conscious thought, he found himself speaking aloud, his prayer rising soft but clear in the gathering darkness. Lord, give us strength for what's coming. Protect this family, this land. Guide us toward justice with your mighty hand. And if it be your will. He paused, his heart full of unspoken hopes. Let us find a way through the trial together. At the screen door behind him, the sisters stood silent, drawn by the simple faith in his words. Rose's eyes glistened with tears. Janice clasped her hands together as if in her own prayer. And Clara felt something shift inside her like ice breaking up on a spring-swollen river. The mountain man they'd first met at the cattle pen seemed transformed in this moment of quiet devotion. Here was not just their defender against the railroad's schemes, but a man whose strength flowed from a deep well of faith. The realization settled over them like a warm blanket, comforting and secure. Thunder rumbled one last time, far away now, as if in answer to William's prayer. The worst of the storm had passed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Family bound not just by blood and circumstance, but by growing trust, shared purpose, and the quiet faith of a mountain man who had chosen to make their fight his own. The sisters withdrew quietly, leaving William to his prayers. Inside, Rose began softly humming a hymn as she helped Jedediah to bed. Janice moved through her evening routines, setting things right for the night ahead. Clara stood at the window, watching William's silhouette against the darkening sky, her heart full of emotions she wasn't yet ready to name. The ranch settled into night, the last raindrops falling like gentle benedictions on the newly patched roof. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this moment, hope felt as real and solid as the ground beneath their feet. Dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle pinks and golds as the McGraw family prepared for their journey to court. The kitchen bustled with activity, Janice's hands moving swift and sure as she packed bread, cheese, and dried beef into baskets. We'll need enough for 2 days at least, she murmured, wrapping biscuits in clean cloth. The quiet competence of her movements belied the worry in her eyes. Clara strode through the kitchen already dressed in her best skirt and blouse. I'm riding with William in the wagon, and that's final, she announced, anticipating any objection. I won't sit home waiting while our future's decided. Nobody's arguing with you, sister, Rose said softly from where she sat writing notes at the kitchen table. I've made a list of folks who might come support us. Mrs. Peterson from church, the widow Jenkins who buys our eggs, Mr. Thompson who remembers when Papa first bought this land. William appeared in the doorway, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean shirt and his best coat. Though he'd trimmed his beard and smoothed his hair, nothing could quite tame the wildness the mountains had written into his bearing. Wagon's ready, he said simply. Best see to your father before we go. They filed into Jedediah's bedroom where the morning light fell across his wan face. The old rancher's eyes were bright with fever, but his mind was clear as he looked at his daughters gathered around him. My girls, he whispered, reaching out with trembling hands. Wish I could stand beside you today. But William. He turned his gaze to the mountain man. You speak for this family now. Speak true. I will, William promised, his voice grave with responsibility. Jedediah's eyes closed briefly in pain, then opened again. The Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from another, he quoted softly. the familiar blessing falling like gentle rain on their heads. Rose bent to kiss his forehead, tears threatening. "We'll make you proud, Papa." The wagon journey to town tested both patience and endurance. Every rut and hole in the road sent jarring shocks through the wooden seat where Clara sat beside William. Behind them, Rose and Janice held tight to the sideboards, their skirts gathered close against the dust. "Reckon that lawyer's already there, smirking like he owns the courthouse," Clara muttered, wincing as they hit another bump. "Let him smirk," William replied, his voice steady. "Truth speaks louder than any man's smile." The courthouse square was already busy when they arrived, townsfolk gathering to watch the proceedings. Rose slipped away to greet the supporters she'd rallied, while Janice arranged their food in the preacher's kitchen for afterward. Inside the courthouse, morning sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. The railroad lawyer stood near the judge's bench in an expensive suit, looking down his nose at the ranch family as they entered. William guided the sisters to their seats, his presence solid and reassuring beside them. The judge entered, his face grave beneath gray hair. "In the matter of McGraw water rights," he intoned, "the court will hear evidence." The railroad lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth as creekstones as he held up the loan agreement. "Your Honor, the document clearly shows Mr. McGraw signed away water rights in exchange for necessary funds. The railroad's claim is legally binding." William stood slowly, his quiet dignity filling the room. "Your Honor, we have evidence the document was altered after signing." He laid out the earlier drafts he'd found in the county records, pointing to the critical differences. "This clause about water rights appears nowhere in the original agreement." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The railroad lawyer's smile tightened. The preacher came forward next, his weathered face serious beneath his collar. "I was there the day those railroad men first approached Jedediah," he testified. "They spoke only of a simple loan. There was no mention of water rights in what they asked him to sign." "And you're certain of this?" the judge asked. "As certain as I am of the good book, Your Honor. Jedediah McGraw never knowingly signed away his water rights. These men," the preacher's voice hardened slightly, "these men took advantage of a desperate father trying to provide for his daughters." Clara sat rigid in her seat, hands clenched in her lap. Rose reached over to clasp her fingers, offering silent support. The sisters held each other as more witnesses came forward, neighbors who remembered the original loan, the county clerk who noted the suspicious changes in the documents. The railroad lawyer tried to dismiss their testimony, speaking of progress and development, but his earlier confidence had cracked. The judge listened to it all, his expression unreadable. "This matter requires careful review of all evidence presented," he announced finally. "I will take 2 days to consider before rendering my decision." Clara started to protest, but William's hand on her arm steadied her. The waiting would be hard, but they had done all they could for now. As they left the courthouse, whispers followed them across the square, some mocking, some sympathetic, some merely curious. William walked tall beside the sisters, his presence daring anyone to speak openly against them. "Head high," he murmured to Clara. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." The preacher's wife met them at her door with warm welcomes and fresh coffee. She had prepared the guest room for the sisters and made up a pallet in the study for William. Her kindness, after the tension of the courtroom, nearly undid Rose's composure. "There now," the older woman soothed, pressing cups of coffee into their hands. "The Lord sees all and judges rightly. We must trust in His timing." Evening settled over the town like a soft blanket. The sisters retired early, exhausted by the day's emotions. In the study, William knelt beside his pallet, his prayer rising silent but fervent in the darkness. "Lord," he whispered, "you know what justice looks like. You see the truth of all things. Guide the judge's heart toward what is right. Protect this family that has become." He paused, his throat tight with feeling. "That has become so dear to me." Through the wall, he could hear the sisters' quiet movements as they prepared for bed. So much hung in the balance, not just water rights and ranch land, but the future of 3 brave women who had taught him the meaning of family again. The next 2 days would feel endless, but they would face them together. Outside the window, crickets sang their evening songs. Stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. In homes across town, People spoke in low voices about the day's events, wondering how the judge would rule. But here in the preacher's house, peace descended with the night shadows. They had done all they could. The rest was in God's hands. The weeks stretched long as they waited for the judge's ruling. Life at the McGraw Ranch settled into familiar rhythms, each day marked by tasks that couldn't wait for court decisions. William hauled water from Clear Creek at dawn and dusk. The wooden buckets balanced across his broad shoulders. His boots left deep prints in the path between creek and house, a testament to his constant journeys. Inside the ranch house, Janice's hands stayed busy with dough, kneading and shaping the daily bread. The kitchen filled with warm, yeasty scents that drew everyone near at mealtimes. Her quiet strength showed in the way she kept their home running, no matter what uncertainty hung over them. Rose gathered the local children 3 times a week, teaching them letters and numbers in the church hall. Her gentle voice carried across the yard as she led them in songs and scripture verses. The parents, who once whispered about the McGraw sisters, now praised Rose's patient way with their little ones. Clara moved among the cattle with sure steps, checking hooves and counting heads. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her ledgers showed every penny earned or spent. The cattle buyers who used to mock her size now met her gaze with respect, having seen how William stood beside her with quiet dignity. In town, gossip shifted like prairie winds. That mountain man's proved himself true, folks would say, standing by those sisters, working honest as any man could. Even the general store owner, who'd once led the mockery, now nodded respectfully when William came in for supplies. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber, Rose sat at the parlor organ. Her fingers moved across the keys, playing a familiar hymn. William stood in the doorway, humming along in his rough bass. His voice wandered off-key, more than once making Clara laugh. "Stick to hauling water," she teased, her eyes bright with affection. "Leave the singing to Rose." Their shared laughter filled the parlor with warmth that lingered through supper. They had just finished the dishes when hoofbeats approached in the gathering dusk. A rider appeared, holding a sealed envelope from the county court. Clara's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the paper, then filled with tears of joy. "The judge ruled for us," she cried. "The water rights are ours again." The parlor erupted in celebration. Clara threw her arms around William's neck, while Janice wept openly into her apron. Rose's fingers found the organ keys, leading them all in amazing grace. They carried the news to Jedediah's bedroom, where the old rancher smiled through his tears, whispering, "Thank the Lord," over and over. The evening star rose over Clear Creek, its water now forever tied to the land it nourished. Inside the ranch house, joy flowed as freely as the stream outside, washing away months of fear and doubt. Word spread across the valley like wildfire. By noon, wagons lined the dusty road to the McGraw Ranch, each one bearing neighbors with pies, cakes, and hearty congratulations. The yard filled with the sweet scent of baked goods and the warmer aroma of friendship restored. Mrs. Peterson, who months ago had turned away at the general store, now pressed a fresh apple pie into Janice's hands. "We're mighty pleased for you all," she said, her eyes warm with genuine regard. "It does my heart good to see justice done." The same folk who once whispered cruel words now treated the sisters with careful respect. They praised Rose's teaching, sampled Janice's cornbread, and sought Clara's opinion on cattle prices. William stood back from it all, leaning against the barn door with quiet satisfaction. When Pastor Matthews asked how he'd managed to save the ranch, William just shook his head. "Truth prevailed," he said simply. "The Lord sees to that." As afternoon mellowed into evening, Clara found William by the corral. He stood watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, his broad shoulders relaxed in the fading light. She joined him at the fence, her fingers tracing the weathered wood. "I never properly thanked you," Clara said softly, "for defending us when no one else would, for seeing worth in us when others saw only mockery." William turned to face her, his eyes steady and clear as mountain streams. "No thanks needed for doing what's right." "I want a life with you," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. "Not because my father tried to trade me, or because you saved our water rights, but because I choose it, choose you." William studied her face in the golden light. "Is that your free choice, Clara McGraw?" No obligation, no debt? Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, as free as those mountain winds you love. Through the open window, Janice and Rose exchanged knowing smiles as they set out supper plates. The evening transformed into an impromptu feast, with neighbors crowding around the long table. Laughter flowed as freely as coffee. And soon, hymns rose into the twilight air. As night settled over the prairie, lanterns cast warm circles of light across the porch. The sisters gathered there, their voices lifting in harmony over the cricket song. William's deep bass joined in, weaving through their melody like a strong foundation beneath a beloved home. The stars emerged one by one, watching over the McGraw Ranch where love, freely given, had finally found its place. A week passed like a shadow across the sun. The morning air hung heavy when Janice found their father struggling to breathe. She called the others quickly, and they gathered in Jedediah's bedroom, where dawnlight filtered through thin curtains. William stood in the doorway as the sisters crowded near the bed. Jedediah's weathered face was pale against the pillow, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His eyes, though clouded, held a desperate need to speak. "My girls," he whispered, his voice threadbare as old cotton. "I done you wrong, treated you like cattle for trade." His fingers trembled as he reached for Clara's hand. "Can you ever forgive your foolish father?" Clara's tears fell freely as she clasped his hand. "There's nothing to forgive, Pa. We know you were trying to protect us, in your own way." Rose knelt beside the bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "We love you, Pa. Always have." Janice squeezed his other hand, nodding through her tears. "You raised us strong, taught us to work hard. That's worth more than gold." William stepped forward then, his presence solid as mountain stone. He took Jedediah's free hand in his broad grip. "I give you my word," he said, voice steady and clear. "I'll care for your family as my own. Your daughters will want for nothing." Peace settled over Jedediah's face like evening shadows on familiar hills. "Reckon that's all a father could ask." His eyes drifted closed, breath slowing. "My girls." The words faded into silence as his chest stilled. The small church overflowed 3 days later. Townsfolk filled every pew, many standing in the back. Sunlight streamed through windows, casting rainbow patterns from the glass onto the simple pine coffin. The preacher's voice carried strong and true. "Jedediah McGraw found redemption in his final days," he said. "He learned what we all must learn, that every soul holds worth beyond measure in God's eyes." The sisters sat in the front row, their shoulders touching. William remained beside them, unmoved as a mountain peak. When Rose's shoulders shook with sobs, his steady hand on her back gave comfort. When Clara's tears finally broke free, he offered a clean handkerchief without a word. That evening, silence filled the ranch house like a physical presence. The empty chair by the fire spoke volumes. The sisters moved through familiar rooms that felt suddenly strange without their father's presence. William gathered them in the parlor, where lamplight cast warm circles against gathering darkness. "Your father loved you fierce," he said quietly. "He wanted nothing more than to see you happy, safe, and respected. We honor him best by living as he wished, with dignity, faith, and love for one another." The sisters nodded, drawing strength from his words and each other. Though grief weighed heavy, peace settled over the house like a gentle blanket, wrapped in forgiveness and grace. The weeks unfolded like petals in spring, each day bringing new life to the McGraw Ranch. The sound of hammers rang through town as men helped prepare the old Wilson place for Janice's boarding house. Women brought curtains and quilts, their earlier mockery transformed to respect for her practical dreams. "You'll do fine business," Mrs. Peterson said, hanging fresh curtains. "Every traveler needs a clean bed and good meal." Janice's eyes shone with pride as she arranged her mother's china in the cupboard. Rose's teaching flourished too. The church offered her a proper classroom complete with slate boards and readers. Where once children had giggled at her size, now they ran to greet her, eager for stories and hymns. "Miss Rose," little Sarah Tucker called out after lessons, "will you teach us that new song tomorrow?" Rose's gentle smile lit up her face as she nodded, her confidence growing stronger each day. William and Clara's courtship bloomed like prairie flowers after rain. They rode together, checking fence lines, her sharp wit matching his quiet wisdom. In the evenings, they sat close on the porch swing, planning their spring wedding while sunset painted the sky in gold and pink. "Reckon we should have it here," William said one evening, his rough hand gentle around Clara's. "Under the cottonwoods where your pa used to rest." Clara squeezed his fingers, throat tight with emotion. He'd have liked that. The warm evening air carried the sweet scent of grass as the family gathered on the porch. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, their shapes dark against the green pastures. The creek ran strong and clear, its song a constant reminder of their victory over injustice. Janice lit the porch lanterns one by one, their golden light pushing back the gathering dusk. Rose settled at the end of the porch steps, her hymnal open in her lap. As she began to sing Amazing Grace, her sisters' voices joined in harmony, the sound rising pure and strong into the evening air. William sat beside Clara, their shoulders touching. His weathered face softened as he looked around at these women who had become his family. In Janice he saw strength and determination. In Rose, gentleness and faith. And in Clara, his heart swelled. He saw a partner for all his days ahead. The town that had once whispered cruel jokes now pointed to the McGraw Ranch as an example of dignity. The sisters were welcomed at social gatherings, their opinions sought at church meetings. They had become pillars of the community, their story one of persistence and grace. As the hymn ended, William gazed up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. His whispered prayer of thanks rose from the depths of his soul. "Lord," he murmured, "you turned our shame to honor, our loneliness to love. You brought redemption from hardship." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, understanding in her silence. The creek murmured its endless song, and the lantern light glowed warm against the gathering night. Here, finally, was home. Not in his solitary mountain cabin, but in this place of shared strength and tender hearts. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.